All right, I got this question via email this morning from Margaret, and she was wondering specifically what kind of, if there's any special way to develop drive in your clawhammer banjo playing. I'll just look at some principles that come to mind right away, and I'll share those with you right now. I mean, I think you could break it down to three different principles. At least this is how my mind is framing this morning. Simplifying, modeling, and practicing is a good three-step way to start approaching adding more drive to your playing. Now we're talking here in general, but the question was specifically about clawhammer banjo style, creating that drive when you're accompanying fiddle tunes and other old-time string band type of music. But for the most part, we're talking about clawhammer back up to a fiddle tune. First thing I always recommend when you're trying to get more drive and rhythmic punch to a banjo part is to look at how complex you are trying to make that part, and most likely you probably need to simplify it. You probably need to take some steps back, knock a few notes out of there. That's going to help you a lot. So the first step is redaction. I always, if you've taken my lessons and courses, you know that anytime I present clawhammer banjo arrangement for a fiddle tune, I'll give you a melodic version and a rhythmic version. And I do so that you can see the full range, the whole spectrum of possibilities there as far as approaches to playing clawhammer banjo on a fiddle tune. I'll use the tune Liberty for an example today. That's a pretty common one. I'm just going to play it in the key of C in the double C tuning. I'll share the tab with you for a melodic and a rhythmic version on this so you have something to reference. I'm probably not going to play anything exactly as it's written in that tab, but just so you know, I'll give you a demonstration. So here would be a melodic banjo approach to Liberty. That would be a basic melodic approach to the tune Liberty. And I was pretty much playing every single note of that melody the way I know it in my head and the way I play it on the fiddle. So that's a melodic approach. I'm playing the banjo as if it was a melodic instrument and not necessarily an instrument taking a rhythmic role in any kind of musical situation. But for the most part, if you're playing banjo along with a fiddler and or a string band, you want to take a more supplemental role, and so you're going to serve the music and you're going to serve your desire to get more drive out of your playing if you just start removing a bunch of these notes that you might be inclined to try to play. So what I always do whenever I learn a fiddle tune is I do start by learning the melodic version. I find it as best I can in the clawhammer style, no matter how difficult or challenging it may be, because I feel like you can learn a lot from that. But then I start walking it back and then go to the other end of the spectrum. So the other end of the spectrum from playing melodically is to play rhythmically. If you get all the way back to the other end of that spectrum, I would say just follow the chord progression. So the first thing I could do is just play. If I'm just following the chord progression and maybe doing some straight boom chickas and maybe a little variation here on the right hand, I'm going to have a lot more control of what I'm doing. It's going to be a lot less challenging for me. It's going to minimize the possibility that I slow down and hesitate and lose some fractions of seconds here and there trying to execute these wild passages. Instead, I can just focus on where the downbeat is and where the tune needs to go rhythmically and drive-wise. And something like that's usually going to have be way more welcome by a lead player, whether it's a fiddler or some other lead instrument, because otherwise, if you're trying to play all the same notes at the same time, it's just going to be too busy, and things are going to start falling apart. So that's idea number one, just simplify. Now, you can find yourself a place along that spectrum there. You don't have to just play a chord accompaniment. So I might end up on Liberty playing something like... just a quick example I was throwing out at you, nothing set in stone there at all. But hopefully that gives you a clear idea of the principle I'm trying to relay here, which is you can start out complicated in order to get a good holistic understanding of the melody and the tune, but then you want to redact, simplify, and go closer over to the chord accompaniment kind of end of the spectrum, like a conventionally effective banjo part. Let's talk again about the three ideas I threw up there. Modeling is the next one I recommend. And by that, I just mean listening to and watching players that are doing what you hope to achieve and trying to emulate it. It's the age-old folk process of how we learn anyway, right? So watch, listen, copy, emulate as best you can. And sometimes you might just feel like you're doing an impersonation, and maybe a bad impersonation at that, but that's not really the point. It's about taking that information in through the eyes, through the ears, and doing it deliberately and intentionally with the idea of absorbing some of that information. And you will absorb some of the finer details of what it means to play with that nuanced kind of drive in your playing. You'll absorb a lot of that intuitively if you're intentionally listening, watching, and trying to replicate, even if you don't have any technical or mechanical advice to follow. If you're just a decent intermediate player and you're trying to emulate other people, the more you're subject yourself to the visage and the sounds of what they're doing and attempt to replicate it, the closer you're going to get there. And make sure right before you practice, which is number 3, right? Make sure that you listen and watch right before your practice sessions, or maybe even during your practice sessions, depending on how you want to divvy that up and strategize your studies. So those 3 things, once more, just simplify the melody. That's going to buy you a lot more mental and temporal time to catch up and focus on the things that are important to you, which at this point is namely creating that drive and kind of making sure you're hitting that rhythm right where you want to. You can discuss the nuances of drive beyond what I've talked about here today, but I want to leave it there. So simplify, make sure you're actively watching and listening to people who are getting the results that you want and trying to replicate them as best you can, and make sure you're trying to replicate them, that you're practicing consistently. All right, I hope this helped. I'll see you in the next video, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments.